how do you kind of articulate, the notion of cookery and cookbooks as a radical act, as a resistant act?
Generally, food is politics. Food tells you the political situation in whichever state you're in, whether it be a peaceful one or one that's more turbulent for sure. But I think had there been peace, I probably still would have made the project because the food needs documentation. The world doesn't know about it. And Sudan has struggled for like decades and decades, as I said. And I just found myself in this really interesting time in Sudan. And it was important to document that as well, just as much as documenting the food culture.
Welcome, Omer Al Tijani, to the Radical Futures podcast. We're here to celebrate your stunning, absolutely gorgeous cookbook called The Sudanese Kitchen.
Thanks for
Welcome.
having me. So happy to be here.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you. And the book is not simply a cookbook, even though that's sufficient for many of us. It's also a really artistic work. I mean, it's clear that you're an artist.
Thank you.
It's also very rich in cultural information about Sudan itself, about history, about the geography. And it's also very personal and intimate. You start with a few stories about your childhood and things that attracted you to kind of working on this project. So I just want to start there. Where did all this begin? All this interest in food? Because as far as I know, you don't work as a chef or anything anywhere.
No. I'm not a trained chef. I didn't really learn how to cook at all until this project came about, actually. The project kind of, the infancy of it was me living away from home at university. And this was kind of when I was learning how to cook. And I was a bit sick of like the kind of boring kind of student meals that I was exposed to. Nothing was really exciting me or feeding my soul. And I really missed home cooking. And that was one thing that made me feel kind of more connected with my Sudanese identity, especially as someone living in the UK and had been living in the UK most of my life. I mean, I grew up in Sudan for the first 5 years of my life. And then we came to the UK and would still remain connected to Sudan, would go every year to visit family. So I maintained a strong connection with Sudan and Sudanese food, of course, all the way growing up. So then as I suddenly left for university, I was suddenly without this food that I really loved and really missed. And I was just like, I'm not just going to wait until I go back home. I'm going to try and make them myself
Yeah,
for myself
yeah.
and to the people around me.
Yeah,
That's
that's pretty unique, I think. To try to learn the food rather than, I don't know, what do students do? I guess they order takeout. They complain about takeout and spend money
yeah,
at restaurants,
yeah,
which
yeah,
makes me think like Sudanese food isn't really like available, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. You can't order it. Yeah,
Yeah, why do you think that is? Because I'm trying to think there is, when it comes to the African continent, I think, the more popular foods are, of course, like Senegalese, and I know in the UK, Somali food is getting more and more popular. And then I wonder if with Sudanese food, people just imagine it to be like the same as Egyptian or, any Middle Eastern food, but it's quite different, right?
yeah. I mean, people assume Sudanese food is something, and it's probably something quite different, or they have no reference point at all. They couldn't even tell you what Sudanese food is, or like they don't even know where to begin with it. Whereas Sudanese food is a really interesting like mixture of cultures. What's so interesting about Sudanese food is a fusion of many different cultures because Sudan is itself is a fusion of so many different people and cultures from different backgrounds. So you're right, it is similar to Egyptian food and kind of food from West Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean. It is similar to those foods. A lot of foods are borrowed from that region because we share a language and we share a history. With the movement of Islam, as well as later the Turkish occupation of Sudan. But then Sudan is also very well connected to Western Africa as well. So like northern Nigeria and Ghana have like the Hausa and the Fulani tribes. They've moved over into Sudan again since Islam became prominent throughout North Africa. And it kind of strengthened the connection between kind of West African foods and Sudanese foods, and there's a lot of like cross communication there, as well as like local indigenous things. So like East African reliance on grains. I mean, our main grains are sorghum and millet, and eventually the British introduced wheat and things like this as a cash crop. So it's just a really interesting mixture of different foodways, I guess. And that warrants representation. No one knows about it, and it's a fascinating fusion food. So, I've loved it all of my life, and it just seemed like a shame that people didn't know about it. So I thought, let me correct this. I think it's something that needed correcting, and it seemed like an interesting project to get involved in. So eventually, after collecting the recipes, I realized the importance of them, not just for myself, but for our community as a whole and for the globe as a whole. Like, why shouldn't anyone in the world be able to access Sudanese food? If we have access to all these other cuisines, why is Sudanese food not celebrated like the others? And I mean, you asked the question about like why aren't Sudanese restaurants readily available in major cities around the world? I mean, that the answer to that is very like multi-layered, and we can talk at length about all the different reasons why it doesn't. But man, I can't explain to you in
Yeah.
concisely why.
Yeah.
It felt like documenting was something that I could do. At least I might not necessarily have the means to open a restaurant up. I mean, at some point in the future, hopefully. But what
Yeah.
I could do was document it. And
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's a great starting point. I mean, no, even I'm struggling a bit with the answer to that question. Just, I mean, I grew up in India, and the UK in particular is crazy with the Indian food
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. So we
I
can take
know there's
India
a
as an
volume
example.
of people, of course, that's a higher volume of migration, perhaps,
Yeah, not just
South
that, but
Asia.
also like the historical link between India and the UK is much longer
Yeah,
than Sudan. Sudan, I mean, India became a colony a long time ago, and the connections between the two countries have been going on since then. The migration of Indians to the UK has been consistent. Yeah, yeah, for a long period of time. Therefore, like the British were kind of maybe more exposed to Indian foods, and then kind of fell in love with Indian foods, and then they have like many Indian restaurants and different types of Indian
yeah,
restaurants
yeah,
across England. With Sudan, there isn't this strength of a connection. Yes, there's a diaspora, and there are Sudanese people there, but also that diaspora doesn't look to restaurants or restaurant culture as a way of sharing their cuisine or their expertise. They do open restaurants, but they're usually for Sudanese people, and they don't necessarily, if I'm honest with you, and blunt, unfortunately, is they don't necessarily market it in the best way possible. They market it to Sudanese people, to older Sudanese men specifically, and not necessarily to a younger international crowd, which is more lucrative for them. They're happy with just a couple of simple things, simple menu, nothing too exciting, some simple Sudanese food, and that's it. Bish bash
yeah,
bosh, as they say here. Whereas it needs restaurants need some flair. They need a lot of marketing, and you need to really work at the menu to make it accessible to people, make it exciting and interesting. And that's
yeah.
what Sudanese in the UK unfortunately don't have.
Okay, well, you're out to change that, and I hope that happens because that would be super exciting. Where did you grow up? So I work on Sudanese literature. I write a little bit about Sudanese literature, and the only I went to Sudan in 2022, like just 6 or 7 months before Khartoum fell. And I was only in Khartoum, Omdurman, like just that urban area. So of course I didn't even try whatever the range of food there might have been available. But where do you draw what's your kind of base? Is it Khartoum? Is it urban? Or were you part of rural stuff with family? Like,
No, I was urban. I was urban. I was raised in Khartoum the first
okay.
5 years of my life, 5, 6 years, and then moved from Khartoum to the UK and lived in various parts of the UK. So my reference to Sudan has always been the metropolitan area of Khartoum, Omdurman, and Bahri. And those three cities were definitely like my reference point when it came to Sudan. I'd only really leave Khartoum a couple of small occasions to go to our family's home in Berber, which is northern Sudan, but only slightly north. It's still on the river. So Berber is an old, like, historic town on the river. Um, And again, up until very recently, I hadn't even been to like another city at all. So for the project and for the research, this was the first time really that I was able to leave the city and see other parts of the country. And, you know, like going east to Port Sudan, going north to see more pyramids and more cultures up north, and eventually traveling to Western Sudan as well. So the book really allowed me to travel the length and breadth of the country and document the food culture, as well as working with photographers who were photographing the trip with me, which is what you see in the book, and it's beautifully photographed. So
Yeah, it's
very
really,
rich.
really beautifully done. And you have in the preface or in the introduction, you're talking about just how vast Sudan is. I think it's like the second largest country in the, on the African continent, and also like really large just in terms of the globe itself.
Yeah,
And very different in terms of regions and what they call terroir, or I don't know, fancy words in gastronomy and things like that. And I will say the same about India. It's like a huge country, very different, but I would still claim there are some common things that people do, as much as it may not be, people might think that's not the right thing, like the North eats very differently from the South. But there are some things you can say clearly Indian food is, that people will eat whatever, a roti or a naan,
right.
or there's a lot of rice based things, stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. Is
Would
there
you say
stuff
that's
you can
common
say?
throughout India?
Huh?
Would you say that roti and naan are common throughout India?
Roti, a bread of wheat flour,
Yeah,
is common in all states, and I think depending on how much, some places eat more rice
yeah,
and less wheat, but they will all eat wheat and rice like
same.
this they do,
Right.
and in some form or the other,
Hmm.
even if it might vary it.
Yeah,
And I think that the cliche is Indians are eating like spicy food
right.
all the time. But the truth is that across the board, they do use chili powder,
Yeah, yeah, I know.
maybe less
I
or
know.
less or more. So I just, I wonder, like, is there some commonalities
To
we
some
can,
degree, and again, it probably would, as you mentioned, it would probably be the breads. The breads are like the base of a lot of these cuisines and foodways and things like that. And I think I would also mirror the same kind of point that you're making, that it's the breads that are the consistent factor throughout Sudan. So the specific breads I'm talking about are kisra. Kisra is like a thin sorghum, almost like a crepe, a very thin piece of like sheets of bread that are quite soft and supple, and they soak up like the stews that we make, which are called mullah. Mullah is also common. Was more of an umbrella term. Mullah is like a stew and a gravy that it can be made of very different ingredients. It could be meat based, could be vegetarian based, but it's usually like a consistent gravy, if you know what I mean. The ingredients are broken down with like a whisk or something to really break everything down so it's homogeneous. It's not like there's a piece of this and a piece of this. It's all one consistent gravy. That's a very rich stew. So this is common throughout Sudan, but then different ones are made in different regions. And the bread kisra is common throughout the country. And there's another dumpling as well called asida. Asida is like a dumpling. So like you cook the flour in the water until it becomes quite hard, or firmer, let's say. And this is common throughout other African countries as well. So Nigeria has one, Kenya has one. Kenyan, they call it ugali. In Nigeria, there's the fufu and things like this. So
yeah,
these types of dumplings are also quite common, I would say,
yeah.
throughout Sudan as well. So there
Wow.
are some common threads, but everything else is
Stuff.
extremely varied for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon this a bit, but maybe you can explain a little more. Like, yes, the perception is that it's very much like a Middle Eastern type of food, like these fool and like, there are those elements, but then it's also African, and that's Sudan's geographic typicality, right? That it's belongs, it belongs to all those places, and then of course you have the sort of Yemen, Red Sea, that whole East Africa side of things. So, would you compare the food then to, I don't know, Somali food, Ethiopian food, Yemeni food? Is there some, because those places have those kind of, cool mixes as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think the mixes with Yemeni food, though, and Somali food specifically, are only really specific to those regions. Like, yeah, maybe Yemen shares commonalities with the Arabian Peninsula and then borrows some things from East Africa.
Yeah.
Somalia borrows things from Yemen and then maybe Eritrea and possibly Sudan. But what Sudan does is bring huge regions together. We're talking about Sudan connecting southern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean with
Amazing.
Western Asia and West Africa. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a much, much bigger range, let's say, or like culinary capacity within Sudan. Whereas the other countries you're talking about, I would argue that their locality is much more local.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, fair enough. You know it. So let's talk a little bit about how the book itself came together. You said 10 years ago you started working on it. What gave you this idea? Because, cookbooks are notoriously expensive
Yes,
projects.
yes, they are
And
definitely,
it's not
and they're
clear whether
long
they
projects as
yield.
well.
Huh?
Sorry?
They may not necessarily yield, like,
Yes.
they may not make you rich, is what I, what
Yeah,
I.
books generally don't make people rich, I think, but cookbooks specifically, they take a long time to make. They're very meticulous, and a lot of work goes into them, especially because they're usually books that contain photographs, and the photographs have to be edited, and you might need a range of different types of photography. So when it comes to the actual production of cookbooks, it's definitely a lot more challenging than other like literature endeavors. But it was a fun process. I really enjoyed it. It was an honor to be able to document Sudanese food all the way up until recently. But the project started because a cookbook about Sudanese food doesn't exist, and I was collecting these recipes for myself, and then people wanted
Collecting
them.
from your mom or
Yeah.
your family, like,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, from my mother and my aunts specifically. Aunts who who could rely on for like good recipes, or I like their food, or we talk about food and stuff like this.
Can I say very quickly, like, I've tried to do some stuff like that, and it's like totally hopeless sometimes, like
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
measurements and
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Everyone says the same thing to me. I totally agree with you. They all tell me the same thing, that they have tried these things. They've tried to get recipes from their mothers and aunts and people like this, and they just tell them, oh, just put a little bit of this, or they're talking on the phone with them and they're on speaker. Be like, oh, just put a bit of that, and nothing's very specific. So, I was patient enough to sit with them at length and be like, listen, I just need like an hour or so of your time. Can you just tell me in more detail what exactly you do? And then we like iron out all the recipes, like one by one, take them, especially when I actually came to the actual, because before it was just a pet project for myself. I could use a voice note that someone sent me to cook with. I just play it and I would cook as the voice note played. That's fine. But when it came to the actual like writing down of the recipes, that's when I had to really sit with people. I'd go to them with a recorder. I'd have like my notepad and everything, and we would go through every recipe. And thankfully they were patient, and thankfully I was patient. But we got past this kind of obstacle of like add a little bit of this to like quantifying what that means.
yeah. So you had a pretty solid test kitchen setup. You were
Test it.
testing
Yeah,
stuff.
that makes it sound like quite professional, but like I improvised with what was around me for sure. Some of it was here in the UK, some of it was in Sudan, and yeah, I was able to test the recipes as I was writing them, and just kind of seeing what needed more of this and less of that. Because sometimes when someone tells you something like a recipe, you have to actually test it. You have to really see, because everyone's hand is different, everyone's kind of gauge of something is different. So yeah, we had to test the recipes, and that was also long and took its time. And we've got more than 100 recipes in the book, so everything took its time. But it was a beautiful process. It was like challenging and difficult, but also amazing.
Yeah. And then if we're talking about you starting this 10 years ago, say
Yeah,
2014 or something like that, then we're talking about the upheavals that begin in
absolutely.
2018, 2019.
Yeah.
How did all this affect, or how did it become integral, perhaps, to your project?
I think it just made it more important. It made it like as the struggle. for Sudan, which has been decades and decades long. It just made it more important to document these recipes and document this food culture, and to put the food into the correct context, and really talking about the richness of Sudanese food culture. It just made it more essential, and yeah, I just took it more seriously, and it became my form of resistance. Like, if I would be going out to the process and things, protests in Khartoum and things like this. But another form of resistance for me was to archive, to document, and to put the work into the cookbook, because then this will stand the test of time, hopefully, and people can learn about our culture, as a resistance to what's been going on politically.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things during those protests that I was very interested in were like, the murals that were coming up, the incredible murals.
Of course,
And
yeah,
then,
yeah.
and then by the time I went, many of those murals had been, the army had already erased them. Then they would come back, then they would erase them. But I had stumbled on this book. I think it was published in Germany, which kind of had documented most of them. And I actually couldn't even believe that somebody had done this and that it's available, because the forces attempting to erase it were so quick and so vicious and so violent. So it's making me kind of think a little bit about the importance of like this, being able to hold this thing with this vivid color, vivid beauty, absolutely essential archiving work. And yes, it's 100% a work of resistance. I mean, um, you know, at Radical Books Collective, we've done programs about what we're calling like radical cookbooks, which are primarily books that are engaging with cuisines that are marginalized, or cuisines that have had a lot of rupture because of conflict,
Yeah.
And so Somalia is, of course, very important within that, Afghanistan,
Absolutely.
and
Up.
Syria, places like that. So what does, how do you kind of articulate, the notion of cookery and cookbooks as a radical act, as a resistant act? Do you feel if things were just sort of rolling along in Sudan, all is well, life is normal, no conflict, would it have spurred this, or would you have really done this? Like, how much of that is a real force for you, the politics of it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with there's so everything is connected, and like food connects so many things. So you're talking about peaceful states, or like states of conflict, for sure. Yeah, I get it. But generally, food is politics. Food tells you the political situation in whichever state you're in, whether it be a peaceful one, or one that's more turbulent, for sure. But I think, had there been peace, I probably still would have made the project, because the food needs documentation. It hasn't been documented. The world doesn't know about it, and Sudan in a peaceful state is a great way to show people that. But Sudan has struggled for like decades and decades, as I said, and I found this little window of this incredible transitionary period between, as people started going out onto the streets and demanding, rights for everyone and equal rights, understandably so, and as they had been for decades. So I just found myself in this really interesting time in Sudan, and it was important to document that as well, just as much as documenting the food culture that we were working on. And it was just yeah, an energizing period. And I think I touch on that many times in the book, in order to keep the revolution alive, let's say, especially in the state that we're in now, where we have this 2 years long war. It was important for me to highlight the importance of the revolution and what that really did for everyone, not just for Sudanese, but for non-Sudanese like yourself, who might have visited and seen it, as well as others who I later found out that they had no idea the revolution even happened. They didn't know anything about it here in Europe. Maybe their media was showing them something, or whatever, but some people didn't even know that this even happened in the first place, that so many people had lost their life in this struggle for freedom. So I think it was always important for me to constantly go back to that place, and highlight what the Sudanese were trying to do in that time, as they had been for decades and decades. So for me, they went hand in hand. The documenting of the cuisine and culture is an act of resistance against the ongoing kind of oppression that had been experienced in Sudan.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, that's a brilliant. That's a brilliant answer.
Thanks.
Um, did you, there's something interesting. Like there is a Sudanese conflict, and it's decades long. Like if you're thinking about like Darfur and all that kind of stuff, and then now with
So long.
it's just so long and so still ongoing, pretty relentless. But it's a cuisine that's, I would say, food wise, it's lesser known, marginalized. But I don't think it's got the negative energy. So I'm remembering when 9/11 happened. I was living in New York, and there was immediately this obsession with like don't dare eat in Afghanistan restaurants, boycott Afghan
Or French
restaurants.
fries.
That, yes, one should definitely boycott those.
Yeah.
But boycott Afghan restaurants. There is always a lot of kind of hostility towards Iranian or Palestinian food. And I know that in Pittsburgh they came about this place called Conflict Kitchen, and it used to do these pop-ups of these axis of evil places, like people really taking it out in like the sickest of ways. But you wouldn't, that is not the case, right? With Sudanese stuff, it's just a kind of general lack of visibility.
Yeah, for sure. I think absolutely. I don't think there's any connotation that Sudanese food is anyway linked with the political situation in Sudan. If anything, it's the antithesis of that. It's
Yeah.
actually, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that Sudanese food is the rebellion against what's going on in Sudan. Because these groups are trying to split up the country, they're trying to divide it, they're obviously trying to land grab, they're trying to sell to the highest bidder. But what I'm trying to do is say that Sudanese food is like a range of different cuisines. We're all together. We're all Sudanese. We all come from different backgrounds, and we're all one people. We're all like one Sudanese people that we all want equal rights for one another, and that we shouldn't be, divided and oppressed and told that you're from this place and you're from that place, and constant division between people is the antithesis of what the political system is trying to do in Sudan. So yeah, I'm trying to create unity and harmony and celebration. Essentially, we should be celebrating one another, which we can easily do when we look at Sudanese food because it is so bountiful and abundant, and
I,
even the
I'm,
food culture itself is beautiful.
I'm going to be a killjoy and kind
Well,
of just say that I think that's tough because there's always food superiority within countries. Like it's like ours is better than theirs. And what are some of these kind of gossip can you tell us?
I wouldn't say that exists in Sudan. I don't think like maybe to some degree, but generally speaking, there
Yeah.
isn't this like, oh, uh, our culture is better than your culture. I think especially in the context of Sudan, where there's been a bit of a power imbalance between the ethnic groups that make up the country, especially since independence. It was the riverine Afro-Arab Sudanese. They were given like more political power, more political influence, and greater access to wealth, essentially. So they already had this kind of upper hand on a lot of the other countries, which again caused such a problematic issue with the Southern Sudanese, which unfortunately had to secede in 2011. So in the Sudanese context, we definitely, especially the young revolutionary spirit of Sudan, is all against any superiority over anyone. We're all Sudanese, we're all equal, and no one's food is better than anyone's. It's all good. It's all delicious.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And I want you to be right, but I suspect, that
There's
it
always
might.
going to be bad actors, but like let them do their thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's good. To be more serious, like the thing that has plagued Sudan is a sort of a crisis of, hunger and starvation, all man-made, absolutely awful. I mean, the numbers when it comes to thinking about the crisis of hunger, the crisis of starvation, aid not being allowed in, just kind of disruption to agricultural activity. All those kinds of things have been so awful. How do you kind of, how does your book work against the grain of that, work to kind of engage with the joy of things. I don't know, like how do you work on food when everybody talks about hunger? Something like that.
Sure. I
I'm
mean, as you said, it's, and rightfully so, the hunger issue in Sudan is absolutely man-made. We're talking about a country that has the largest portion of the longest river in the world going through it. So there's so much abundant fertile land that a country like Sudan, and it was, quoted as being like the breadbasket of Africa, but it really could be the breadbasket of the entire region if it was allowed to, if the agricultural potential of the country really reached this capacity. And not just would Sudan be fed, but the entire region would be adequately fed. And it is still being very well fed, actually. It's still, even in its state, or like most recently as well, so much of its produce goes to the Arabian Peninsula. So much meat from that region already goes to that region and feeds global markets, even in the state it's already in. So it's already feeding people in kind of its difficult capacity. But so it just goes to show that this is all politically done. This is all intentional by the governors of these countries and the leaders of Sudan in order to control the country. It shouldn't be in. We shouldn't associate Sudan with famine or poverty. That is all done through political means, for sure. So what I'm trying to do is trying to to celebrate the food. I mean, I'm not going to solve the hunger issue in Sudan by this type of work, but I'm at least going to highlight the diversity of the cuisines and the potential that we can all have. Like no one should be able to go hungry, and it's unfortunate that they do, but it's political and it's not nothing to do with like
I know.
the people.
If anything, seeing the abundance and seeing like the, amazing amount of recipes and photos and all that, um, works to break those stereotypes. Actually, I actually, not it's not just that it's a stereotype; it's a real issue, but it works to break against that as the dominant image of a place. So I think that's it's pretty powerful, as a countercultural sort of text or something like that. What about challenges to publishing? As we were saying before, it's expensive to do these. They may not yield back. So did you experience any challenges? How did you kind of come across the Almas Art Foundation, who said they would do it? And in what economy does a book like this circulate?
So yeah, I mean, it was challenging. There was many challenges along the way, from the production
Yeah.
all the way to even all the way back to the beginning. I think when you embark on a project like this, you obviously need money. You need, just like any big project, you need to secure funding. Securing funding for the project wasn't so straightforward. It took a long time. Had to be quite patient with people, and even as we secured the funding, it wasn't always straightforward when we would be receiving our next payment or anything like this. It wasn't like on clockwork we would be receiving things on time. No, I would constantly be, hassling an email and be like, we're still doing this project. We still need your work. We still need your support. So, and then it came to, as we mentioned earlier, the collecting of the actual recipes, the quantifying of the dishes from aunties and whatnot, and then traveling the country at the same time as a revolution is happening, while there's a fuel shortage, and we're driving from Khartoum to Al Fashir with things like this, and photographing and documenting, and then to come back and to do the food photographs, which were done in a studio in Khartoum. But logistically, that was probably one of the most challenging things, I would say, is like the logistics of, because you have to have like a setup. You have to have like your own equipment and everything for food photography. You need like special things and paintbrushes and whatnot, and little things like this, and little solutions to make
Wow.
the food, as attractive as possible for the photograph. You might not even be eating it afterwards because it might be cold or something, but you need to make it look appealing. Um, and then things like, for example, we'd be setting up these meticulous shots, and we'd be getting these paintbrushes out and making the food like look very, very nice. And then the electricity would cut out, and then we wouldn't we couldn't shoot anything.
Yeah.
So we
Wow.
lost all the photo. We couldn't shoot that
Yeah.
day. So all that food would have to go, and we'd have to try again the exact same thing, like the next day or the following week or whenever. So there was many, many challenges throughout the the process. I
It's
really,
literally how I perceive
uh-huh.
all the all the current Sudanese culture. Like that's how it's like, if you're thinking about the film Goodbye Julia by
Right.
Mohammed Kurdofani, I think it was shot in like complicated conditions. Or like I'm thinking about an even older film talking about trees, and they too are having like electric cuts, and they're going, and it's all it's all put on tape, and it makes its own kind of fascinating story. But it's just, this is so kind of what you're saying. It's just like I've heard it before somehow,
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or if you visited Sudan, you might get a
Yeah,
sense of like what things are like because everything's so immediate in the country. Everything's all
yeah.
going on at the like at once almost. It's a fascinating place to be for sure. But yeah, it definitely brought a lot of challenges in the production of this book. And even after we'd finished, editing a book is complicated. Getting the right images together, and then really making it a holistic body of work was took its time for sure. But I was going to say that I'm really fortunate to have the team that I had. It definitely isn't a solo project, even though I'm the front face of it. My editors were fantastic. The designer is incredible, as you can tell from the book. All of these are professional people who work at a very, very high level, and they're the ones that really pieced it together. And they were very patient, especially the designer, who we'd go back and forth so much about the aesthetic of the book, how everything should be presented, and
What is the aesthetic of the book in your words? Like in those conversations, what did y'all
oh,
say?
okay, in those conversations, um, I just wanted an attractive book that isn't too cluttered. The book, the pages have space, and they feel like it feels like there's space in the book. It doesn't feel like everything's jumping out at you and taking your attention. The fonts, I think, are delicate. I want it to just look like, just like Sudan, but it's like Sudanese excellence. I want it to be like the most, like a showcase of Sudanese culture in like a nice, tasteful, kind of subtle way. Nothing
Yeah,
too garish and in your face.
yeah, and it's just lovely.
Great.
And what about? Did you have some models? Like, were there some particular cookbooks that you were,
Mm. Mhm.
modeling or thinking alongside? Which were
Yeah,
they?
yeah, for sure, for sure. There's a vegan Iraqi cookbook by Lamis Ibrahim. The aesthetic for that book is really nice. Just the photography is really nice in it. The way she's arranged those pages are really nice. Just like the subtlety of the way it looks is really nice. Yasmin Khan is also another influence for sure. She has like a couple of Iranian cookbooks. So again, I was thinking about African cookbooks or just books from the region that celebrate the culture in a really interesting way. Like you can see certain color palettes or like aesthetic motifs that represent the country, yeah, that they're talking about in a really nice way. And I think that's what I tried to do. So,
Yeah. There's a book that I love. It's called Gaza Kitchen, and it's
mhm.
by Leila El Haddad and Maggie Schmidt, and it's old now. It's almost 15 years old. But one of the things I love about it that it's very much also like an ethnography, and it's like a real kind of, there's history in it. Of course, it has proper recipes, and they went all over Gaza, finding, all the aunties, many of whom actually died in this current devastation. But so it reminded me a bit of that. But theirs is like it's printed on. Somehow, I think they were trying to make it accessible price wise. So it's not it doesn't it's not a hardback actually. It's a paperback, and it's but it has all this kind of similar stuff like maps and things like that. Anyway, it's beautiful. Check it out if you haven't already.
Sure,
But it's
sure,
very
sure.
good.
But yeah,
And I want to look at the ones you're talking about. They sound amazing,
yeah, they're
actually.
nice. So I tried to do something similar, something ethnographic, something that teaches people about the country. I wanted it to be informative and fun and not kind of boring. I wanted, as people were turning the pages, like something unexpected appears. Like, anything else could jump out at you. And I didn't want it to be predictable. I wanted it to be a bit unpredictable. That's why the sections are divided differently. Some are personal stories, some are obviously recipe chapters and things like this. Other times it could just be a photography break and just we have a few photos one after the other. So
Yeah, glorious. So I'm going to ask you one last question. So if I say, we've talked a bit about like people don't know quite a bit about, say, Sudanese food, and we're not talking about in Sudan, of course, we're talking about diaspora, UK, US, whatever. Um, and if I say, you know what, I can make this, I can give you this one item, one Sudanese item, and it will be available in all the supermarkets. It will, be served everywhere, and you
Right.
just get one.
Right.
What will
What
it
would
be?
it be? Probably ground okra, which we call weka. Ground
No.
only because it's an important ingredient and it's not easy to find.
Okay.
If I could have one ingredient that could be found anywhere in the world, just at the drop of a hat like that, it would be that, because then immediately you'd be able to make the stews that I'm talking about called mullah. Now, mullah is a gravy stew that I was mentioning earlier. All the ingredients are broken down so it's homogeneous, right? But then at the very end, most of these dishes, most of these stews, they have ground okra put into them as a binding agent. So it makes like a watery stew, like more dense. So like it holds together a
So
lot.
ground okra, that's a powder?
Powder. It's a
Mm.
fine powder, fine green powder that's dried ground okra.
Okay.
It's you
So,
should
but I
not
don't want to
impress.
cook it.
Yeah.
Give me a ready to eat item then.
Oh, okay. You meant something that's ready to eat.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, of course, everything you're saying, I do cook, but
Great.
I'm thinking like easy marketable stuff,
I mean,
ready to eat.
all the other stuff exists, but maybe if okay, but like a proper, because Sudanese food relies heavily on peanut butter, but the peanut butter that we have in Sudan is it's just like a lot of the oils are extracted out of it, so it's obviously 100% organic, whatever. But it's and they're roasted and everything. Everything's fine, but we don't leave the oil in it. Like that's usually taken off, and that's what we call dekwa, right? So it's just peanut paste that doesn't have the oil in it. And yeah, I would say it's slightly different to peanut butter that you find in diaspora or wherever, yeah, in the world, in supermarkets, let's say, because it's either they have additives added to it or they say it's 100%, which it is. I'm not disputing that. But they have all the oil in it and it just makes it kind of, I don't know, just kind of, yeah, different. And I would rather have the Sudani version, which is ready to eat, and you can add it to all these stews, and it's like proper Sudani dakwa is what I would love to
Very
make
nice.
available everywhere.
And then in this business, in this fantasy business, I'm going to want like bottled karkade
Oh, of course,
everywhere I
we
go.
can have more than that. We can
I
have
mean,
baobab juice, we can
yeah.
have tamarind, we
But
can have
that
all that.
hibiscus, whatever it is that they serve up everywhere, it's too good. It's gorgeous.
They're all amazing. Yeah, I mean, I love the
Yeah.
karkade. Have you had the white karkade? It's so good.
Maybe I
So,
have.
so
What is in it?
there's red karkade. The
Yes,
classic one is
I
the
know the
red
red.
hibiscus, right? So there's red
Okay.
hibiscus, okay? Then there's in Sudan there's white hibiscus.
Okay.
The juice comes off like an amber color more, so it's yellower, more ambery. And it comes from a different plant, which is the white hibiscus. So it's just a white version of the hibiscus. It's slightly different taste, by the way, and so good. But I love the others. I love baobab.
Okay.
I love
Yeah.
baobab juice so much, and tamarind is one of my favorites as well.
Yeah. Sure. No, all good. Well, I hope you can plot towards somehow doing that. Now you've written the cookbook. Now you have to bring the foods in, somehow. I don't know how, but thank you so much for joining me. What a great conversation and so nice. And I hope wish your book all success. Thank you for doing
Thank you so much for having me, Brigitte. It's been really fun talking to you. Thanks a
it.
lot.
Yeah. Thanks.